JFJ.com. We have been telling you all morning long that this morning my very special guest, Mickel Jackson, who is the Executive Director of Jamaicans for Justice, will be on with me discussing subjects like decriminalization of consensual sexual intercourse between minors, and we'll also be looking at maintaining the age of consent at 16. These are hot button subjects that many people are in fact discussing even as we speak, and so we're very, very pleased to have her on this morning. Mickel Jackson, season's greetings. Nice to have you on this morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. Season's greetings to you and to your listeners. I'm doing well, and I hope the same for you.
Yes, I'm doing well, and we're really happy to have you on.
Thank you so much.
Some statements were made by you recently, and it has formed the basis of many discussions. Shall we start with the matter of decriminalization of consensual sexual intercourse between minors? What did you publish recently, and what reactions have you been getting so far?
Okay, let me start by putting context to the call that was made. And this is not the first time that organization has made the call, actually. Mm-hmm. But last week, I believe, we released a report that assists what is called the Child Diversion Program.
Yes.
It's a beautiful program that the Ministry of Justice initiated in 2020, following the passage of the Act in 2018, I believe. And the purpose of the legislation and the program is this: children who commit offenses or are suspected of offenses, rather than bringing those children before the courts as the first resort, you have the police and the courts as well that can divert, in other words, steer those children away from the adversarial court system. So in other words, say a child brings a knife to school. It is an offensive weapon. It is what you call a strict liability offense. You can be charged for it. You as well can be charged for that, and you can get up to 3 years imprisonment, I believe. Mm-hmm. The police can say to that child, I am not going to bring you to the police station and have you go before the courts after I charge you for this offense of offensive weapon. I'm going to call your parent and I'm going to talk to your parent. Based on that conversation with the parent, the police can divert that child by referring the child to the diversion program. The child gets certain social interventions. The police can also opt to charge the child if the police believes that it is not in the best interest of the child at that moment. And actually, what our report found was that there is low knowledge among police officers about the program. So even though the police has the authority to divert that child, you find in most instances the child ends up before the courts. And it is at that time now, the prosecutors can say, Judge, I think it is in the best interest of the child that you divert the child, that the courts divert the child. If the child has an attorney, the attorney can also make the same recommendation. That is the child diversion program. So
yes.
In other words, it ensures that the child gets social intervention.
Mm-hmm.
What we found with that program is that more than half, I think close to 60% of the cases for which children were being diverted are sexual offenses matters. Now, we don't have the data to look at the individual cases of sexual offenses matters, but most of them are having sexual intercourse with a person under 16. Because there was no other accompanied charges, we surmise that it suggests that most of these cases seems to be consensual intercourse among minors themselves. So in other words, 2 15-year-olds having sexual intercourse. Those are the types of matters that you'll find coming before the courts. So JJ's position is this: no child should be having sex. We do not support it. We believe children should benefit from comprehensive sexual education so that they can delay sexual initiation as long as possible. Not even when you reach 18, because they want to be in the position where if you get pregnant, you can afford to take care of the child. Mm-hmm. That's our position. However, there is the reality that children are going to have sex. the question that we ask ourselves, should two 15-year-olds be brought before the courts based on our law, how it is under the Sexual Offences Act? Those two children can actually be charged for the offense of having sexual intercourse with a person under 16, even though they are two minors themselves. That was not Parliament's intent. Parliament's intent was to protect minors from adults who are predators. So in other words, a 20-year-old man, a 30-year-old man, or a woman who has sexual activity with a person under 16, a minor, should be charged to the fullest extent of the law. But it was not Parliament's intent to have two 15-year-olds be dragged before the courts, be treated as criminals, and then we ask the courts to take care of the problem rather than investing in preventing those children from ending up in the courts in the first place. That is the essence of the call that we're making. Decriminalizing the sexual intercourse between minors and focus on the comprehensive sexual education.
Got you. How does the JFJ distinguish between consensual peer activity and even exploitation by adults?
Well, I mean, the law is very clear that, for example, if you look at the offense of rape, it speaks to the issue of consent that would reach the threshold of an offense of rape being made against a person. If you look at other sexual activities, it's the same, coercion. So if, for example, you go on a date with someone and you drug the person, you put something in their drink, and then you commit, act on sexual intercourse or some activity with that person without their consent, then you can be charged for rape or you can be charged for grievous sexual assault. So if there is coercion, the act is without consent, the law deals with it. If you're a person in authority, the law also deals with it. So, for example, a teacher, a pastor who has sexual intercourse with a minor, that person is a person in authority, and very clearly the law would be able to prosecute that individual because you have leveraged and exploited that dependency that the minor had on you, and therefore you would be charged. So the law is very clear dealing with those distinct types of matters.
As you see it, what harms can result from criminalizing consensual sexual activity between close in age peers?
Let me give you a real example of a case that we helped a minor with recently. Two 15-year-olds, boy and a girl, they participated in sexual touching. The girl is touching the boy is touching the girl. The boy acted on what we call digital penetration, which is the act of inserting one's finger into the vagina. The police did not charge the young lady. The police charged the boy with grievous sexual assault. And for the purpose of the listeners, grievous sexual assault is a serious offense that carries up to life imprisonment. No, that child more than likely would never have gotten anything that sentence that high. But the point is that only the boy was charged. That little boy, we accompanied him to court on at least 4 occasions, and he is to go back in January to benefit from the child diversion program at the urging of our attorney. And this is a common scenario wherein 2 children engage in consensual sexual activity, and 9.5 times out of 10, it is the boy child alone who is charged with an offense, missing school. In terms of the impact, I just mentioned it. The child missed several school days. The child is charged with an offense, which means that he was placed on bail conditions. So in other words, even during the summer, he could not leave his home after 6 o'clock in the evening. This is a little boy who is traumatized. So we are going to have to be talking to the family now to see what types of counseling support he can benefit from. The other cases that we've supported, we had to send those children to a psychologist because they were so traumatized, because sometimes you're acting on what we call normal adolescent feelings. We all have feelings naturally that comes with developing. But what we say is, do not act on them. Wait until you're older. But this child did not deserve to go before the courts, missing school, now seeking to benefit from a psychologist because of the impact that the court, that is overwhelming for any adult, much as a child, and that child had to go to court on several appearances.
So the JFJ seems to be emphasizing education and prevention rather than punishment. Do you think that is sustainable? Is that sustainable?
Well, we already have what you call the Health, Family, Life, and Education program in high schools. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, we did a survey recently, another one, which we released in a few months. And 7 out of 10 adolescents make reference to the HFLE program as their source of information. I'm not sure if you remember, like the Ministry of Health had recent, or years ago, pinch, leave, and inch and roll, something like that.
Yes, I remember.
You don't really hear certain ads on the radio anymore, and that's what you have to teach. Delay, you're not ready, but if you do, you use a condom, you make safe choices. That's what we have to promote, and yes, it is sustainable. And I think we have to ask ourselves, do we focus on comprehensive sexual education, empowering parents so that you can have that talk with your child? Or do we treat our children like criminals and then hope that it is with the intervention of the courts that they can benefit from social intervention? Mm-hmm. I think we have to ask ourselves, what was the intent of the law? Was the intent of the law to turn our children into criminals, or was the intent of the law to protect children from criminals and from predators? And I think once we answer those questions, you will either get an understanding of why JFJ is making that call, or certainly join us in that call being made.
And for the benefit of the listeners, the HFLE program to which Ms. Jackson referred is the Health and Family Life Education Program. Now, Ms. Jackson, how do you respond then to concerns being expressed by members of the public about decriminalization? What's the message that you say to them this morning if they're that concerned?
I understand that it is a sensitive issue when you have children and sex in the same sentence. But I think we have to look at the best interest of the child in this scenario. And while our collective morality as a country is that children should not be having sex, we also have to face the reality that if they do, we should ensure that they benefit from the best intervention and not the courts, because we are traumatizing the children and we risk turning our minors into criminals rather than focusing on prevention, rather than focusing on comprehensive sexual education, then we risk turning them to criminals. So I hope that we understand that calling for decriminalization is not a license to go and have sex. Calling for decriminalization is not the intention to lower the age of consent. Quite the contrary. We believe that children ought not to. We believe not to have sex. We believe that the age of consent should remain. But we also have to be looking at balancing the scale, where our children should not be dragged before the courts like criminals if they do engage in sexual activity. And we should ensure that we center our response as a society on counseling, on parent empowerment, so that parents can have appropriate, factual conversations with their children, so that the children can understand, for example, the possibilities of contracting STIs, sexually transmitted infections, teenage pregnancy, and the implications of all of that. We can explain to them the issues of consent so that they understand when they say no, no means no. And if their partner say no, no means no. Those are the conversations we should be empowering society to have with children, rather than us saying that they should not be having sex and therefore let's bring them before the courts and the courts will deal with them. Mm-hmm. That's an overly punitive measure that has not worked. And in fact, when you look at the recent data around STI and HIV, our 15 to 19-year-old is one of the more significant age group in terms of the rise in new infections in the country. That's not JFJ's data. That's data coming nationally from the Ministry of Health and UNAIDS. Our 15 to 19-year-old, they are contributing to the increase in STIs. So the punitive approach that we have been taking is not working. So therefore, we need to shift the focus to comprehensive sexual education.
And just before you go, Ms. Jackson, spend a little bit more time expanding on the reason why you believe it is important to keep the age of consent at 16.
People tend to look at the age of consent, firstly, as basically permission to have sex. That's not the intention of age of consent. No parliament is saying ever that I'm giving you permission to have sex. No. The age of consent is there to set the legal threshold where criminal charges can be laid against somebody who has sexual intercourse with a person under a particular age. Because that particular country, so some countries may have their age of consent lower, most are at 16 and some put it to 18 years old. So what our government is saying, I have identified this particular group as a vulnerable group. And for Jamaican Parliament, the vulnerable group that we have identified are persons under 16. And therefore, if you're older than 16, 20-odd-year-old, for example, and you have sexual intercourse with a person under 16, it establishes the baseline for which an offense has been committed and you can be prosecuted. That's one. The second reason for age of consent is that it permits a child to have access to sexual and reproductive health services without their parent being there with them. So in other words, a child who is 16 years and over can go to a medical facility and have an HIV test without the parent's consent. That child can go to the doctor without the parent being there. So that age of consent establishes those parameters.
All right. Well, listen, you've made your points very clearly. I'm sure the discussions will continue. I want to thank you for coming on this morning at this early hour. Even if you feel that you're not so much of a morning person, you did so very well talking with me this morning that I will have no reservations for booking you for another morning interview. But I thank you.
Anytime.
Thank you, Mickel. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year when it comes. Thanks again.
Same to you. Take care. Bye-bye.